Hey there, Laker fans. Welcome to another episode of Radio KBE. As always, thanks for liking, subscribing, and sharing. You guys have been awesome. Today, I wanted to talk about, take sort of a different path and get into some off-season talk and sort of talk about some of the trade rumors that you've seen and sort of the information that's been sort of passed out early on in the season. Or early on in this off season. And right now it's still the beginning of June. The finals are about to start on Thursday, and so there's not really much to kind of go with, mainly because the players on the Lakers and many players around the league, they haven't decided whether they're going to opt in or not. And obviously the Lakers are waiting to see if Russell Westbrook's, when Russell Westbrook opts in and stuff like that. So one of the things, and it also includes Kendrick Nunn, one of the things I want to talk about in today's episode, as you guys can see the title, is just looking at trade scenarios. So I thought maybe one thing that would be sort of helpful is to start diving in more of a comprehensive manner, just sort of looking at it from all different facets, what the most plausible, what the most common trades that have been getting proposed, and the validity of those trades, whether they even make sense for a certain team or whether they don't. And the way I always try to do these sort of things, and again, I'm an amateur cap guy. It's not. I just read through the CBA stuff and the CBA FAQ and stuff like that by Larry Kuhn, and I follow Eric Pincus. He does a wonderful job explaining stuff, especially to just all fans in general, but also just Laker fans. And so most of my cap skills when it comes to everything are I can confidently say are amateur. And so if any of my numbers during this episode don't seem entirely accurate, I apologize. It's probably just some oversight or something in the fine print with the CBA that I didn't see. I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not used to reading that much fine print normally. And so it's sort of done with the best of my abilities and just kind of understanding the trade rules. So for this episode, what I wanted to do was dive into what are the most common, simplest trades that the Lakers could conduct with Charlotte. And obviously the main focal point that we're going to talk about it is going to be Russ, because he's the largest movable salary, and that's generally the person that's been speculated. And we know a few weeks back, one of the reason why the Hornets were mentioned was because I believe Mark Stein wrote in his newsletter that the Hornets may possibly be interested in pursuing a trade for Russ. And I think the one thing that Laker fans have to understand, and I think Hornets fans and Hornets writers would agree, is that the trade doesn't have anything to do with basketball value. The Hornets are pretty locked in with LaMelo Ball, and they want to feature him as a creator and the flair and everything that he plays with. So acquiring Russell Westbrook is more of an asset roster related move as opposed to, and maybe a cost savings move as opposed to an actual basketball move. And that's something that's important to understand before I start going into these trade scenarios. And I just want to make that disclaimer, because I'm not going to get into like what picks would be needed, if they would be needed and that sort of thing, because it's always hard to gauge and value those sort of things. But this is looking at it strictly from what makes the most sense, what benefits the Lakers, but also benefits what the goals of the Hornets may be in part of that process. And so we're going to take a comprehensive look at 3 pretty straightforward trades. But before we go into that I think a good thing for us to do is to understand why the Hornets would consider even working with the Lakers or even consider pursuing this option. If you watch any of the previous videos that I've done, I've mentioned many, many times that Russ's contract is a huge expiring. And one of the advantages to that huge expiring is the fact that the Lakers in the CBA, because they're a tax-paying team, if they send out whatever outgoing salary they send out, and I'll show you the calculations in a little bit. If we send somebody out, we can bring up to 25% salary back, which means that we can alleviate more cost from the other team than we're actually sending out to them. So we may send out a $47 million contract, but the Lakers can bring back $55 million, up to $58 million, which is close to based on what the projected cap is going to be next year, It's almost 50% of the cap. So when you think about it from a value standpoint and what it can do for a team, that contract essentially wipes up to 2 max salaries. Like if you're in like the 7 to 9 year max, or the one of the lower tier maxes, like the second contract max after the rookie extension, you could, if there's a team out there that signed a guy to a contract that was like a 4/120, that, you know what, it's just not going to work, like maybe the Hornets have with Gordon Hayward, a Russ contract wipes those books clean, like years in advance, and we'll get into just sort of the total dollar advantages and stuff like that. So there is a lot more value to Russ's contract for teams that are rebuilding or teams that are retooling. And for me, the Hornets don't fall into the category of a rebuilding team. They fall into the category of a retooling team. They're a team that understands that there are certain guys that are core parts of what their vision is moving forward, and what they want to do is move the guys that they tried to invest in, that they're hoping would take them into like the upper echelon of the conference, and move off of those guys for whatever reason. Injuries, the fit just isn't there. Maybe, you know, there's too much overlap in responsibilities. You know, in the Hornets case, when they signed Gordon Hayward, they probably didn't expect, you know, they expected a clean bill of health. He hasn't been healthy. He's only played 42 games and I believe 49 games last season. And then on top of that, you know, LaMelo's taken a huge leap. And this past season, Miles Bridges in his contract year took a huge leap. And as a result of that, there's been other guys that are on the team that have sort of, you know, lost minutes, been put into bench roles, guys like PJ Washington. They've added guys like Kelly Oubre that were eating up significant minutes and possibly were better fits to the play style that they wanted to play. And mind you, the Hornets are also a team that doesn't have a coach right now. James Borrego was the coach for the past 2 years. He may have been before that, but, you know, they had an improvement in wins, but they both, you know, they got bounced out early, and they didn't make the playoffs. So there's a question in regards to play style with them when it comes to that too as well, that they're going to be trying to figure out. But even aside from that, even aside from play style, even aside from all of that, one of the core things that drive some of the moves that go on with a lot of franchises is cost. How much does it cost to compete? And what does competing actually mean? You know, is it making the playoffs? Is it contending for a championship? Is it making it to the second round? For owners of these teams, and this includes the Lakers, playoff revenue is a big deal. Like making playoff revenue, those gate receipts or the concessions, all that stuff is all a big deal. And for the most part in the NBA, owners don't want to pay luxury tax money unless, you know, the math is working out. If they're making it to the second round, at least, if they don't think they can make it to the Eastern Conference Finals. So there's always margins when it comes to that sort of thing. And so we'll do this together. And so that was sort of the goal with this deep dive, and it's going to be a little bit more interactive with visual aids and stuff like that. So I'm going to share it with you guys here. So the first thing that I always try to look at when it comes to this process is, what does the luxury tax situation look like for a specific team? And if you scroll down here, the Hornets next season, they've got 11 guys on the books. I think a couple of them are unguaranteed. Some of them have player options. They're at $109 million. The cap the cap in itself is, they're below the salary cap. And they're very far away from the luxury tax line. They're $39 million below the luxury tax line for next season. But when we take a deeper dive and we take a deeper look into what's going on with this team, you can start seeing how some of the decisions that they have to make as a team could affect their ability to stay underneath the tax line. And this is sort of the genesis of like what may encourage them to make a trade for Russ and get his expiring for the purpose of getting out of long-term salaries. So the three trades that we'll look at today, the core feature player is going to be Gordon Hayward, and I'll get to him in a second. But the thing that I wanted you guys to see is, you know, for the people who keep saying that, you know, why would Charlotte do any of this, and, you know, what is their interest in this process and stuff like that. If you take a look at Charlotte's situation, they have a guy in Mason Plumlee that's only partially guaranteed. He's only guaranteed half of his salary for next season. But you can see, even though they're about $40 million underneath the luxury tax line, even including the dead money that they owe to Nicholas Batum, they have three specific guys. There's three specific players that are looking to make money. They're looking to get a bigger payday or get a payday and get a longer term contract to some degree. Now, I don't know where they're at with the basketball fit with some of these players, but some of them it's very clear that the Hornets are going to try and retain them. So first and foremost, the first guy you're looking at is Miles Bridges. He had an outstanding season. I had him listed as a most improved candidate up until Jordan Poole kind of took the reins after the trade deadline and was a heavy favorite. And then, obviously that went to Ja Morant because of his leap going from the pick that he was to MVP caliber player in Memphis' rise. So Miles Bridges is up for a pretty big payday, and it's going to be in the excess of 20 to 25 million. So already of that $39 million that they're underneath luxury tax, like 75% of it's going to be taken up by Miles Bridges' extension. And his agent is Rich Paul, and Rich Paul tries to get the maximum amount of money for his clients that they want, because that's usually what they want. Miles Bridges, coming off of his rookie contract, he's going to be looking to get the biggest payday he can. Remember, the second contract is typically that's the big payday. So many players, unlike the third contract, many players around the league, as they come off their rookie extensions, they try to get as much money as they possibly can. And I would imagine it's no different for Miles Bridges too as well. But when we take it a step further and we take a look at some of the other guys that are available, Montrezl Harrell, a player that they traded for at the trade deadline. Originally, he was traded from the Lakers to the Wizards, and then from the Wizards, at the trade deadline, when the Wizards went on a full fire sale, he was traded to Montrezl Harrell was traded to the Hornets, and he had some friction with the coach. He didn't really get as much playing time as he wanted in the playoffs. Seems to be a recurring theme with him. But Montrezl Harrell is what I would think Draymond Green would term as a great 82-game player. If you have Montrezl Harrell on your team for the regular season, he's going to give you great effort. He's going to play really well, and he'll help preserve the legs and the bodies of the players on the team. And so, he's got a lot of energy. He plays hard. He can play backup center. He's up and down, running up and down the floor. A good pair possibly for the LaMelo Ball pick and roll action and just kind of LaMelo style of play with his passing ability. So now you've got Miles Bridges. You've got this potential new contract for Montrezl Harrell. And then you've got Cody Martin, another guy, a wing. His brother's over in Miami. But Cody Martin, who was coming off the bench at times for Charlotte, who was, a good role player, and he's a good defensive guy, hustle guy, much like his brother. And you think of him as like a Kelly Oubre light, sort of like a guy who kind of fits into the same role that Kelly Oubre was in for, has historically been in. And he's also up for an extension. So already you've got three guys who are probably going to be core parts of this roster next season in some degree. And this is my assumption just of what I know of what's going on with the Hornets. And then on top of that, the Hornets have 2 first-round picks, the 13th and the 15th. You can see a little bit lower over here, and a second-round pick that has no cap hold. So not only do you have a situation where you may be sort of rubbing up against the luxury tax line and may have to sort of navigate that very closely, you also have a situation where if they use those first-round picks and they don't trade them, you're going to have a positional logjam. So now what you have is you have a guy like Gordon Hayward who's being paid $30 million. Kelly Oubre's paid $12.6 million. Terry Rozier's getting paid. Mason Plumlee's got paid. But at the same time, you've got LaMelo Ball, Miles Bridges, who are going to be staples in your starting lineup. But then you've got another guy who's going to have an extension the following year in P.J. Washington, who's kind of lost his starting spot. And he's in and out of the starting lineup. It's hard to tell, how he's going to be played and that sort of thing. And there's data that probably supports different lineup variations that can make the team successful. But it's very clear that, after LaMelo and after Miles Bridges, it's anybody can be moved. And we don't know necessarily what direction that the Hornets want to go in, whether they want to use the picks, whether they don't, that sort of thing. But there's a positional logjam. You have too many guys that play the same exact position. And when that usually happens, and when you have an established vet, and then you also have young guys who are trying to basically get the bump that they need so that they can accumulate their stats so then they can make a case for themselves in the second season, for their second contracts, that becomes a huge deal. And you can see in Miles Bridges' example, that's exactly what it was. Like LaMelo and Miles had, if you watch the highlights and stuff like that, like they were incredible together. Like there was tons of LaMelo alley-oops to Miles Bridges, but you could also tell that LaMelo wanted to make sure that Miles Bridges got his money and he got paid. And so he was always looking for him. And Miles Bridges had an outstanding season in itself. And so, I hope his trajectory continues to go upwards. But you could see how those sort of differing, or there's competing interests. There's multiple guys that want to get paid. Look at a guy like Kelly Oubre in this situation. He's already, he took a shorter term deal at $12 million. But a guy like Cody Martin or a guy like Montrezl Harrell may look at Kelly Oubre's contract and say, well, I think I deserve $12 million. Montrezl Harrell, I think the previous 2 years or the previous two times, he signed the non-taxpayer MLE, which is around $9 to $10 million. So you can see how there's competing interests. So now we have one part of it, which is the luxury tax, and the Hornets running up against that possibly. And Michael Jordan, the owner, does not like paying luxury tax, and I would imagine no owner does unless if they feel that their team can actually contend or they can make that money in the playoffs. And then we know they're running up against luxury tax. And then the second thing is that there's a positional logjam. This is before they've used their first round picks. So when you combine those two things, that's when you sort of that's a good combination mixture for, hey, we've got to move some of these guys because we need to either move forward with the youth or we have to move some of the young guys and figure it out from there. And so this is where that conversation with Russ and him alleviating some of these contracts. So that's another advantage that you get with Russ's contract. Aside from the fact that it's so large, it's just one player, which means that if you trade for Russ and let's say you buy him out and then stretch his salary afterwards, what it means is that you don't have to waive a bunch of spots, right? Typically when you think of trades that involve $47 million of salary, you're thinking of 2 or 3 players combined. But in this case, you don't have to worry about that. It's just one player. So you're only waiving one player. You don't have to worry about losing roster spots or creating roster spots to do that. And so the combination of not wanting to pay the luxury tax potentially and the combination of and the positional logjam, it gives the Lakers an opportunity to possibly pounce on building some depth for that team. And it's so for our team. And so one of the things that's now been sort of in place is that Darvin Ham is the Lakers coach, and he's had a lot of experience with the Hawks under Mike Budenholzer, and then also with the Bucks. So I would imagine that we're bringing some of that offensive and defensive philosophy to the team. So a guy like Gordon Hayward fits in to that philosophy to some degree. He's a high IQ player. He's not lacking for skill. It's mainly been his injuries. He had a horrific injury in his first year with Boston, where he hurt his ankle in the very first game of the season, and he sort of made his way back gradually. But he's had some issues staying healthy. But the skill has always been there. Maybe the athleticism's taken a little bit of a dip, but in a spread out offense and his ability to shoot the ball, his ability to attack the mid range, his ability to play point forward to some degree at his size. He's a valuable wing that the Lakers could potentially add to the team. And he may not necessarily be the shot in the arm in terms of athleticism that they need, but we can cover that when we cover the trades. We'll take a look at what options that the Lakers do have. So he's really the feature of what that trade would be, and if we move Russ away. And the most important thing is his health. The gamble that the Lakers would have to take. Remember, Russ is always available. He almost never gets hurt. And if he gets hurt, he usually is still able to play. And availability is a big deal. We know it's a big deal to LeBron James. And it's, I would imagine it's a big deal to our front office as well. So I don't know if the Lakers would go for a guy like him, Gordon Hayward specifically, because of his lack of availability these past 2 seasons. But, if they think that he can stay healthy for 65 games out of the season and then be healthy for the playoffs, they may consider targeting him and having this conversation. And then the one overlap, obviously, is Mitch Kupchak used to be the Lakers GM. He just got an extension. He is the Hornets GM, and so there is maybe a line of communication available there when it comes to it and figuring things out. And so the thing that I wanted to sort of cover when it comes to Gordon Hayward, and it's very hard to project what the Lakers offense is going to be like, but just kind of thinking about the way the different players that are in Milwaukee's offense, one of the things that the Lakers probably lack that they don't have is outside of LeBron James, and also we don't know if Anthony Davis can be this guy because of his levels jump shooting and consistency. We lack mid-range scoring, and we lack three-point shooting above the wing. The corners we were okay, but we were average or above average. But above the wing we weren't really good. And one of the things that Gordon Hayward helps us sort of alleviate is his ability to shoot from those areas, from the mid-range, from above the three, with relative accuracy, with good percentages. He's actually really good at drawing fouls, sort of crafty in that manner. When he goes to the rim, when he chooses to go to the rim, and obviously I think with his sort of dip in athleticism, probably he probably doesn't do it as much. From what I remember, Hayward's been a pretty good cutter too. He's an active cutter. Again, high IQ guy. He's been a high IQ guy since his days at Butler. Was a favorite of Brad Stevens, and I think if he hadn't gotten hurt with the Celtics when he did, that team would have been really, really good with a young Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown on that team. So injuries can always change the course of somebody's career, but sometimes the skill remains. And so when we take a look at last season and what Gordon Hayward's chart is, he only played about 48 minutes. He only played about 48 games last season at about 32 minutes a game. And what you can see here is a lot of his shots, right? About 38% of his shots came from the mid-range. And then, the curses. About 33% of his shots came from the three. And, he did have, there's a pretty even distribution, 30-30-30 between the rim, the mid-range, and the three. And so that's always a good sign because it's, the shot frequency, and when it's a little bit more evenly distributed, for me personally, it makes me think a lot of times that distribution is, it's a good indicator of somebody who takes the best shot available, as opposed to somebody who's only going to his strengths. And there are times where you want to only go to your strengths, but a more diverse shot frequency from different places usually means that, in my mind, the person's capable or confident in their abilities to do more than just go to the rim or just take threes. So that's good. So as we continue forward, and we take a look at just kind of what his percentages, his scoring rate overall, just sort of average at the rim, 62%. That's a decent number, but you can see the volume isn't significantly high. The number that I really liked was this long mid-range area right here. He shot about 41%. You can see that even among the team, you could see the shot selection for everybody on this Charlotte team. Nobody was a good shooter outside of Terry Rozier and PJ Washington for this team from the mid-range, and that made them a little bit more predictable, especially with Gordon Hayward out. But one of the good things to see here is just kind of what Gordon Hayward's non-corner three percentages are. So you can see that he's really good. He's a good three-point shooter from the corners, but these non-corner threes are important because if we think about the way that Milwaukee uses a guy like Chris Middleton and how they have him placed on the wings as opposed to having him placed on the corner, when they play Bobby Portis, they usually put him in the corner. They won't put Middleton in the corner. They'll put somebody else in that position. Or they'll take Brook Lopez and they'll park him in the corner so that he's the escape pass option on Giannis's drives. We don't know who's going to fill that role, but we want more guys that can shoot from the wings. We want guys that are a little bit that can shoot from above the free throw line when it comes to the three ball, and so that bodes well. So we know that the shot frequency is balanced, and we know also that like he can shoot above the three, and that he shoots at the mid range with decent accuracy. So if he's going to be the centerpiece, the biggest risk that the Lakers probably take is his health, if he can stay healthy, and that's just something it's hard for me to speculate on. Like, I don't know if in a Darvin Ham offense, because remember, Charlotte plays fast. They play really fast. It's more frenetic. It's more frantic. The Lakers are a little bit more methodical because they have guys like LeBron, who's more methodical with the pace that he plays at, not as frantic. That was one of the issues that the Lakers had as a team with Russ. Russ would play fast, but then we would run lineups without guys that could run with Russ. And so it led to bad results. But when we ran lineups where the players on the floor were guys like Malik Monk, Austin Reeves, Taylor Horton-Tucker, guys who could run with Russ, you saw better pacing, you saw more consistent attack, downhill attack, and stuff like that. So it stylistically, it'd be interesting to see how it goes. I like the idea of Hayward, if he's healthy, if he can stay healthy. His ability to sort of be that point guard for the Lakers, the backup point guard if he's in the starting lineup. His ability to get to the rim is much, is underrated, I think. His willingness to take mid-range shots. Again, Darvin Ham's offense, the Milwaukee offense, a lot of their actions start off with them screening, running a basic pick and roll screen. Like, these are easy half-court possessions, easy half-court opportunities for a guy like Gordon Hayward, or for anybody who's a good mid-range shooter that the Lakers can capitalize on. It keeps a guy like Anthony Davis engaged even when he's not shooting the ball, because he's physically being involved with the offense and stuff like that. So I didn't want to cover every single player that would be involved in the trade because I think it's a lot. So I just wanted to cover Gordon Hayward because he would sort of be the main centerpiece. So let's go on to like the three main trade scenarios that are probably are the ones that I think we can discuss. I'm not going to include any 3-team trades, like ones with Oklahoma City who have like 20 million under the cap floor and stuff like that they need to eventually fill out. Like, I'm not going to cover those right now, mainly because it's just it'll get really complicated. The episode will get really long, and I'm trying to be mindful of everybody's time. So let's look at the first trade scenario, a very straightforward one. Just trading Russ for Hayward. The reason why you would do this, the reason why the Hornets would do this is purely to get out of, the situation that they're in, which is they owe Hayward a grand total of about, and so his number right here is 34 million, but the actual number for Hayward is 30 million right here. The reason why I included 34 million is because he has a trade kicker that you have to include when you're making trades and stuff like that. But basically, Gordon Hayward has 2 years and $60 million left over. So if the Hornets are trying to save money and clear a positional logjam for a certain player, the Lakers could straight swap Westbrook for Hayward. And again, I'm not going to discuss picks because I don't know if picks would be involved or what it may be. If Charlotte was involved in a 3-team trade with the Lakers, I could see them moving one of those first-round picks to the third team if they wanted to not take on Westbrook's contract and pay a team like Oklahoma City a first-rounder. They could send the number 15 pick to Oklahoma City while they keep their number 13 pick. Maybe they could pick swap with Oklahoma City for a future pick. And what would end up happening is, the Lakers wouldn't have to send that first-rounder for Russ because Oklahoma City would get a lottery pick, basically, from Charlotte. And for Charlotte, it's they clear a positional logjam for a guy that they have other players that can play behind him. And then on top of that, they take on a guy like Westbrook, who they can buy out, they can stretch and waive him. So if they stretch, and any team can do this, if a team picks up Russ and he takes a buyout of any amount, his contract gets, whatever that number is, let's say it's, $45 million, right? Let's say he takes a very minimal buyout of about $2 million. And so he takes a buyout of $45 million. Well, you divide that over 3 years, it's $15 million a year. So if you think about it from the Hornets' perspective, they're only going to have, if they're able to get rid of Hayward, chances are the guy that's going to end up taking that big salary slot for them is going to be Miles Bridges. So they're not going to have that many guys that are eating up big salaries. So eating a dead cap on a dead cap hit of $15 million may not be a big deal for the Hornets. And, that just, it requires some convincing between, Mitch Kupchak, and it's up to their ownership to decide what it is. But basically, if the Lakers do trade Russ and they take back only Hayward, what they also do, the Lakers are also able to do for themselves is they generate themselves a $12.5 million traded player exception, which means they can go to any team and they can say, send us your up to $12 million. This can be split up, so they can do it for a $3 million player from one team, a $3 million player from another team, and then a $6 million player from a third team, or multiple players from a single team. And they can offer to absorb that player and not have to send anything back. And you've seen teams creatively use traded player exceptions. When they do that, they'll often ask for compensation. So what will end up happening is, they can go to a team and say, okay, we'll take this $12 million player, but you got to send us a second-round pick. And so now the Lakers are kind of two birds with one stone. And so they can do a traded player exception in that manner. So that's the most simplest one that you see. So the next one that you can see, the next trade scenario that we have, number 2, it's long-term for short-term. If the Hornets decide with a new coach and, just whatever it is, if they decide that they just want to clear their long-term salary away and just start fresh with LaMelo, Miles Bridges, and all the other young guys that they have on their team, the Lakers can just send just Russell Westbrook to Charlotte for Gordon Hayward and Terry Rozier. And if they do that, essentially what's happening is that they're trading Russ's $47 million expiring salary for a grand total of $156 million of long-term guaranteed salary in Gordon Hayward and Terry Rozier. Now remember, both Hayward and Rozier were pretty good mid-range scorers. They're decent shooters from 3. So if you had to take them and automatically put them into the 1 spot and the 2 spot, now remember, the Hornets ran LaMelo at the 1 and Terry Rozier at the 2, and then they would play Gordon Hayward at the 3. In the Lakers' case, they would probably be the 1 and the 2, depending on whether LeBron's playing the 4 or Anthony Davis is playing 4. I think LeBron and Anthony Davis is going to go back to their natural positions, which is going to be the 3 and the 4. So if you wanted to put a decent amount of size, you could put Terry Rozier, Gordon Hayward, LeBron James, Anthony Davis, and find the center that works. Or if they decide to downsize, what they could end up doing is running Terry Rozier at the 2, Gordon Hayward at the 3, LeBron at the 4, AD at the 5, and then see who's available on the point guard market. Maybe it's maybe they bring back DJ Augustine to just be a traditional point guard, set their guys up and space the floor. Or maybe they wait and see if Eric Bledsoe gets bought out, or there's a lot, or John Wall gets bought out. A lot of different options that they can go in. But the main part of this is the Lakers essentially, the way they maximize it is that they take on Hayward, they take on Rozier, and in this situation, it's probably likely that the Lakers would turn around and ask for picks, because that's a lot of money. You're taking on 3x more total guaranteed salary, and this number right here that I have listed under max incoming salary, this is basically including the rule of the adding plus 25%. So the Lakers can bring on up to close to $59 million. Well, they bring on $56 million just for next year, but then there's a ton of there's almost $100 million, $105 million of extra salary, the extra year to Gordon Hayward, and then the extra 3 years to Terry Rozier's contract that the Lakers are going to absorb. Maybe the Lakers turn around and say, hey, if you want us to take on all this salary, you got to send us a first and a second, and we'll do it. And if you think about it, if the Lakers do this long-term for short-term trade, then what ends up happening is if the Hornets end up buying out Russ and then stretching and waiving his contract, they'll have basically gone from a $56 million cap hit next season to like a $12 to $15 million cap hit. So you're talking about $40 million in savings. Now, if you sign Miles Bridges, if you bring back Harrell, if you bring back Cody Martin, that's easy. Like, you don't have to worry about, you're still so far underneath the luxury tax and salary cap that it sort of works out in your favor. So you can see how the math sort of works out for a team like Charlotte if that's the direction that they try to go in. Now, mind you, these are just ideas that I've come up with. Some you've probably heard before, some you may not have heard before. Now, the one that I like the most, the one that I think is one that probably benefits, kind of is best of both worlds. It favors probably the Lakers it favors the Hornets a little bit more in terms of tax cost savings, but I think it fits the idea of the scheme, fits the idea of what Darvin Ham would want in the scheme is this third scenario, and it's trading Westbrook if they do that, trading for Gordon Hayward, Kelly Oubre Jr., and Mason Plumlee. And the reason why I picked these three players is specifically because the Lakers need very specific types of role players for work. We've already talked about Gordon Hayward. Kelly Oubre fits the mold of a wing player. He's not an exceptional offensive player, but he is a high-effort defender. I'm not going to say he's a lockdown defender, but he's a high-effort defender. He usually ranks decently when it comes to deflections on the perimeter and stuff like that. He's an athlete. He can get up and down the floor. And then Mason Plumlee, for all that he is a high-motor big. He is a guy who rebounds a lot. He will come down the floor, screen every single time that you ask him to. Many times he won't even ask for it. He's a prolific rebounder. He's an active rebounder. He's actually a really, really good option, I think, in my opinion, to pair next to Anthony Davis because he's willing to do the grunt work and do the hard work. And if you've watched the previous video where I talked about the Lakers needing a high-motor big, he does a really, really good job. He's a decent lob threat, and he's mobile. That's one of the most important things that the Lakers have to have. So I don't know if he would start necessarily, but coming off the bench even, he would be helpful. And remember, all these guys can be traded, at some point later in the season too, if things don't go in the Lakers' direction. But you can see with all three of these options, and so, the other thing is also this, like, if the Lakers do trade scenario 3, it also clears that positional logjam. So now Hayward and Oubre are two wings that are now gone. So now you have minutes available for PJ Washington. You have minutes available for Cody Martin. Plumlee's gone, so now you have minutes if you're going to play a backup center for Montrezl Harrell. The Hornets have been rumored to want to target a guy like DeAndre Ayton, or they've been on the market to find a big that can really anchor their defense. They could try and make a separate trade altogether, or do something where they can absorb the defensive guy that they want. Who knows what direction they go in? But clearing those roster spots, making those positional logjams available, like clearing that up, that works in the Lakers' favor because we need the depth, and it helps out Charlotte because it saves them money, and they just don't have to worry about paying the player after that. And Westbrook, I think Westbrook is going to get bought out wherever he goes, no matter what the trade situation is. And they already have they're fixated on LaMelo, so I don't expect Russ to be active like that in that manner. So like the notes for this third trade is that the Lakers would take on an additional $8 million and Hayward's extra year for an extra $8 million for this upcoming season, and obviously Hayward's extra year, and it clears up the positional logjam for Charlotte. This is another scenario where I could see the Lakers turning around and asking Charlotte maybe for one of those first rounders or maybe for that second rounder. You notice that the Lakers' max incoming salary in this scenario is about $58 million, and you see that Charlotte's only sending out about $55 million. Well, if you go back and you look at the cap hold values for some of these picks, you'll notice that the 15th pick in this, the value's at about $3.672 million, and that's a value that you have to actually calculate. That cap hold has to be, you have to pay attention to that and that sort of thing. Like, it may not be a big deal cost-wise for Charlotte because they may be trying to pursue somebody in free agency. But you can see, like, in all three of these trade scenarios, because the Lakers are absorbing so much extra salary, especially in number 2, they could ask for a pick, and it wouldn't be unreasonable because Charlotte has 2 first-rounders. It wouldn't be unreasonable for the Lakers to get one. And so it wouldn't be unreasonable for them to ask one just because of the direction Charlotte's going in. And, once they figure out who their coach is going to be and that sort of thing, it'll make a big difference. So, all in all, I think the reason why Charlotte is getting mentioned is because, Mitch Kupchak has ties to LA. And while people have speculated there's a basketball reason for it, I don't think there's a basketball reason for it. Charlotte has shown that with the Nick Batum contract that they don't have a problem waiving and stretching a player that, they deem is no longer playable. And, Nick Batum's had sort of a resurgence with the Clippers, but he's also they don't use him necessarily for more than, what he used to be known for back when he signed a $100 million contract. And so all three of these trade scenarios, I don't think they're unrealistic. I think these are simple one-to-one trades, between two teams that make things the least amount of complicated as possible. And eventually I'll do an episode where we talk about 3-team trades. But I think these specific trades, and with Hayward being the centerpiece, it's the simplest way, at least with Charlotte, for the Lakers to improve their depth. And the reason why I wanted to do the simple trades, and I've specifically talked about Hayward, is because of what his fit is now within Darvin Ham's offense and defense, and just kind of knowing what it is that the Lakers needed as a team on their roster. So if we bring back a guy like Malik Monk, Austin Reeves is still on the roster. Let's say we bring back DJ Augustine. We already have the small guards available. We know, and Taylor Horton Tucker's still on the team. Kendrick Nunn is probably going to still be on the team if we don't move both of those guys. We'll have enough small guards. We need guys that are size. So, the trade scenario 3 is probably the one that I like the most, because it's a lot of mid-tier salaries that are really nice that can be flipped later if the Lakers want to flip them later. And if it's a successful fit, these are players that can also be extended. If Oubre Jr. turns out to be a really great wing in Darvin Ham's offense next to LeBron James and Anthony Davis, then extending him for a year or two is probably not a problem. We know that if you play well in Los Angeles, your profile can be raised amazingly. The perfect example is Rajon Rondo winning a championship and getting a 2-year, $14 million contract when he was pretty close to being out of the league. And so we'll see what direction that the Lakers go in. And this is just one example of one team that I wanted to cover of something that could be successful for the Lakers and trades that, may make some sense for the team. So, if whatever direction the Lakers go in, there's going to be a lot of factors that are attached to it. Stuff like availability, stuff like fit, stuff like depth, how much it costs to move a player versus, taking another deal, that sort of thing. LeBron's extension, if he takes a 2-year extension, a 1-year extension, or if he decides to play out his contract, that's going to be a big deal also in the Lakers figuring out what direction that they go in and making sure. But we do know that we need guys to fit into Darvin Ham's offense and Darvin Ham's defense. And these are just 3 examples of very simple trades, very simple transactions that could benefit the Lakers both in the near term and the long term. But of course, the biggest leap of faith the Lakers have to take with these specific trades is Gordon Hayward's health and whether they believe that he can stay healthy in order for the Lakers to be successful over an 82-game season and into the postseason. So I hope this was helpful. I hope, this gave sort of a holistic picture of how I think about trades and how I think is the right way to think about it. And this is sort of the format that I'm going to use moving forward. Eventually I'll cover Indiana and a few dark horse teams that I have in my mind that I think the Lakers would be good for. And, like always, no matter what anybody says, I genuinely do believe Russ's contract is very valuable because of its ability to help a rebuilding or retooling franchise. And so, as always, I appreciate everybody that likes. I appreciate everybody that subscribes. When you guys comment, I read everything. I hope this is, always being informative and you guys are entertained. I try to be funny as much as I can. But, if nothing else, feel free to subscribe, feel free to like, feel free to share the video with friends. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take some of this stuff that's in here and I'm going to put it in the newsletter if you guys are already subscribed, and I'm going to send it out in email form with a little bit more explanation. It won't be really anything different much more different from what's in YouTube, but then you'll have it. in your email. And you'll always be able to reference it without having to pull up a video and scroll to like the 35-minute mark to show it to other folks. So that's just something I wanted to do for the people who rock with me like that, the folks that are subscribers both on the newsletter and on YouTube. So I'll try and get that out maybe tomorrow, but sooner than later. And I'll make sure to reference this video in case you ever have to come back. So as always, thank you for liking, thank you for subscribing. It helps the channel. And I hope you guys have a wonderful evening, wonderful day. And yeah, I'll see you in the next video. Thanks.